Hello and welcome. This VPAL signature event is brought to you by Harvard's Office of the Vice Provost for Advances in Learning. Sarah, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It is great to be here with all of you. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So I want to take a few minutes and just set the table about where we've come from for the Harvard and the Legacy of Slavery Initiative and the path forward, and then turn it over to Meira and Jerome and Richard, who can talk about some of the very specific projects that they are doing that are going to help to advance this initiative. So one of the key messages to leave with all of you is that the report, which was released almost exactly a year ago, was not the first time that the university was exploring its entanglements with slavery. So that started back in the early 2000s with Sven Beckert, who's a faculty member in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. He taught an undergraduate course on Harvard and its entanglements with slavery. He, by the way, was inspired by then President Ruth Simmons at Brown University. She was the first president of an Ivy League to explore their entanglements with slavery. Fast forward to President Faust, and there was a committee that she put together where faculty were continuing to pull on the threads that were uncovered in Sven's course. And then most recently, Larry Bacow assigned the presidential committee, which resulted in the report that came out almost exactly a year ago. Now, the report, if you haven't read it, I encourage you to have a look at it. It is a really rigorous document, which really details several key truths about Harvard's entanglements with slavery. The top lines that I want you all to take away are the four ones listed here. The first is that Harvard had direct ties to enslavement. So specifically, Harvard leaders, faculty, and staff enslaved more than about 70 people that we know of. The second is financial ties. So in the 17th and 18th century, a small number of individuals who made their fortunes in slavery and slave-produced goods contributed significant amounts of donations to Harvard. And the third is intellectual ties. So in the 18th and the 19th centuries, there were a number of faculty who did research on eugenics, who did research on race science, areas that now underpin Jim Crow segregation, areas that underpin white supremacy. They have been debunked, but there are still a lot of ideas that came out of Harvard that are still very much used today. Now, those are three very difficult truths that the report unveils. It's also important to underscore that the report talks about really important examples of resistance. So there were a number of Black students over time who have pushed back against several policies at Harvard and have really tried to push Harvard to be a more equitable place. So as we think about this broader initiative, Harvard and Legacy of Slavery, what are we trying to do? And it is really twofold. First is we want Harvard to be accountable to the truths that were unveiled in the report that came out a year ago. And we want to use that knowledge to meaningfully advance reparative efforts. And then the second is that we want to use our resources and our energy to meaningfully engage direct descendants. And you'll hear more about that and how we're identifying that group from Richard. And then how do we also meaningfully engage broader communities that have been harmed by the impacts of slavery? So in terms of who all is coming together to lead this work, that's me on the far left. Next to me is Roshana Moore Evans. She is the executive director for Harvard Legacy of Slavery Initiative. She comes to us from the Broad Institute and has a lot of work in the diversity and equity space and is just a fantastic person, born and raised in Boston, cares deeply about this work. In the middle is Martha Minow. She's the former dean at the law school. She, at the request of President Bacow, chaired the implementation committee that has done a huge amount of work over the past year, which we will talk about, and continues to be a key intellectual partner in this work. Next to Martha is Richard Cellini, who you will hear from today, has deep understanding through his work at Georgetown about how do you actually identify individuals who are direct descendants of those enslaved, and also cares really deeply about this work and holding Harvard accountable for the difficult truths that we just talked about. And then on the far right is Dr. Ruth Simmons. So I mentioned that she's the former president of Brown. We at Harvard are very excited that she will be joining us this summer as a senior advisor to President-elect Claudine Gay, focused on engagement with historically Black colleges and universities, which is an area, one of which that we are focusing in as part of this initiative. And I should say that President Bacow and Dr. Ruth Simmons are close friends, and it is through the work that Dr. Simmons did at Brown that partly inspired Larry Bacow to take Harvard down the path that we find ourselves on today. So I just want to say a word about myself and what brings me to this work. So these pictures are both for me personally, and the one on the left, the far left little child in that picture is me, and then next to me is my brother, and then my twin sister is on the far right. So this picture was taken about 1.5 miles from where I grew up in inner city Baltimore. My parents still live in the same house. This is the parking lot for Memorial Stadium, what used to be Memorial Stadium. It's where the Orioles played, and it's where I learned how to ride a bike. And I put this picture up here because when I was little, I remember looking around my neighborhood and thinking, why is it that all kids don't have the same opportunities? I didn't understand it at the time. And what I have come to realize as an adult is that, anywhere you go, there's so much talent, but there's often really limited opportunity. And so one of the things that's really exciting about this initiative that Harvard is undertaking is that it is an opportunity for us to think about how can we take our educational excellence, how can we take our resources, and how can we partner with others to advance the goals of this initiative. And then on the right are pictures of my girls. So my little one, Cecilia, is the 9-year-old. She's in the yellow t-shirt. And then my big one, Natalia. And I look at them and I see two spirited, happy, feisty, interesting little brown girls. And the world may treat them differently because of the color of their skin. And that is not the way it should be, but that is the current reality. And how do we make the world a better place so that they have a better experience and so that their children have a better experience? And the work that we are doing with HNLS is in support of driving towards equity. So in the report, there are 7 recommendations. I think it's more helpful to think about them thematically rather than number by number. And so there are 4 key things that I want to really draw your attention to. The first is that through this work, we really want to leverage our education, our research resources, and advance opportunities for communities that are nearby, Boston and Cambridge, and then far beyond. We want to strengthen and enlarge relationships with historically Black colleges and universities, or HBCUs, with minority serving institutions, with tribal colleges and universities. We want to identify and then meaningfully engage with direct descendants of individuals enslaved by Harvard personnel. And we want to do all this in a way that ensures institutional accountability. We are very fortunate that the university has invested $100 million in an endowment to support this work. There are 60 to 70 universities around the country that are asking a very similar question of what are our ties to slavery? We are fortunate at Harvard that this area of inquiry is backed by resources, and only one of a few universities that has that privilege. And the amount of money that Harvard has committed, which is $100 million, is magnitudes larger than other universities. So I'm very pleased to say on this eve of the 1-year anniversary that there's a lot to be proud of. You're going to hear from Meira shortly about new curricular resources and trainings that she has developed to help members of the Harvard community to teach and to discuss the report. You're going to hear from Richard Cellini about the Slavery Remembrance Project. You're going to hear also from Jerome Offord about the partnership between the Harvard Library and the HBCU Digital Library Initiative. Do also want to flag that one of the things that the report laid out is the need to create a memorial to honor those who were enslaved and at the same time provide a space for reflection. And so we've announced that committee, and we are sort of doing the work to start that process. It will take quite some time to put the memorial in place, but it is ongoing. And just want to flag that we do have a new website. There's the Harvard Legacy of Slavery website on the Radcliffe site. Separately, we have a website dedicated to implementation. Encourage you to go there to learn more about various activities that are happening in the space. It's also where you can find out about a funding announcement that will come out in the fall semester. And then Rashana Moore Evans, the executive director, is doing a huge amount of work to build up the team that will be required to do the work of this initiative. So if you're curious about, well, how is the university leaning into the report, which is a really important question, because one of the things that Larry Bacow has tasked to the deans and to the leaders of the units around the university is that this should be embedded in our DNA. It should not just be something that's happening centrally, but really something that everyone is doing. And there's a huge amount of activity that we have observed across the university. It really has unlocked a lot of creativity. So some of the more common things that we're seeing are like screening the film. If you have not seen it, I encourage you to watch it on Harvard and Legacy of Slavery, creating a lecture or lecture series, or leveraging the Legacy of Slavery tour, which you can take either in person or online. But there are also some really unique things that some of the schools are doing. So at the design school, for example, they've incorporated HNLS into their orientation materials as a permanent feature. At the divinity school, they have a common read every year where the whole community reads the same book and meets to discuss it. And they chose this year their report on Harvard and Legacy of Slavery. And just earlier this week, had a lunch to really bring everyone together and talk about what it has been like and to celebrate the year that they spent reading the book. And you can see lots of other examples here of how different units are leaning in. Want to give you a sense of some of the key priorities that we have for the coming year. Won't go through all of them because some of them you've already heard me talk about, but we'll just say that as we think about this work, there are some key themes that underlie everything that you see written here, which is we are approaching this work with humility. We are really trying to listen hard, and we are looking for ideas from many, many different stakeholders about how we can really honor the work that we are trying to do. So that is a long way of saying we are looking for your good ideas and encourage you to reach out if you have thoughts or if there are individuals you think that we should connect with. As we think about, the different opportunities across Harvard, a core funding principle is that the $100 million is not meant to benefit inside the walls of Harvard. It is meant to benefit descendants and descendant communities. But with that said, we are looking for ways to leverage synergies between the different schools and also beyond our walls, think about what can we do with organizations and institutions in the Boston, Cambridge area and far beyond. There's already so much happening in the space related to reparative justice that we don't just want to reinvent the wheel. We want to look for opportunities that we can plug in, add value, and partner to try to do more than we can do on our own. So I just want to wrap up before turning things over to Meira by saying that, this is hard work. This is by far, for me personally, the most challenging thing that I have ever done, but it's so exciting. And I think it's just such a great example of taking the strength and the energy and the ability of Harvard to attract a lot of talent and putting all that together toward this really, really important initiative. And so, we're excited to honor those who were enslaved, to honor those who are descendant communities, and just think carefully, continuously about how we can do this work in a way that really is going to honor those who we are trying to represent. And then the last thing I'll just say before turning things over to Meira is that the fact that Harvard is doing this is not insignificant. We are an institution where when we do things, people notice. So we hope that we can also serve as a role model to other institutions as they are thinking about possibly pursuing their own legacies with slavery. So as you heard at the top, we're going to have 3 presentations now. We're going to start with Meira, then we're going to go to Jerome, and then we're going to go to Richard. And Meira is going to talk about the new curricular resources that she developed to help the Harvard community to discuss and to teach the Harvard and Legacy of Slavery report. So thank you, Meira, very much for joining us, and let me turn things over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Sara. And as always, I have to say, it's always inspiring to see your kids and you as a little girl, and also just to hear everything that's going on. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all about the curricular resources that not only, it's not just me, I've been developing. It's really a team that's been great of doctoral students. We've brought in alumni. We're have a really great partnership with VPAL, and it's a sort of community work together on the curricular resources that are available. So Sara mentioned when she was talking through the sort of the resources that are on the Harvard and the Legacy of Slavery website at Radcliffe that there is the film, which I should say is really quite powerful. And I want to say, in addition to the film that's available, we also, as we're thinking about teaching and engaging, it's a hard film to watch. It's It's not emotionally easy. It's actually intellectually challenging as well. I mean, you learn a lot when you watch it, in part because some of the stuff that's in it was not known until the research was done. And so one of the things is you're thinking about how you engage, how you help your department, your school, your alumni group, whatever it is, engage. We do have a facilitation guide that is there as well to help. And so that's something that I know a number of groups have used. Similarly, Sarah had mentioned the self-guided tour experience, which is both available on your computer. You can go through it, online, or it's on an app, both for Android and for iPhones, and you can do that individually. Also, the university has been leading tours. The Harvard chaplains have been leading really, really powerful tours. And we've received a request to create a facilitation guide for a group that might want to do it. So student groups, a house, a department, et cetera. If you want to walk around it together or go through it together online, we are in the final stages. I think really we're at the stage of just getting accessibility tested out and so forth before we can put it up, of creating a facilitation guide so that groups can do this tour experience together. So again, this is already a beautifully designed piece of work, but it helps people have complex conversations with one another as you engage with the different sites. Third, and this is where I have, well, I guess I've been involved in all of these things, but we have been creating a set of normative case studies, normative meaning value laden. So they're case studies to help people think about the values, the principles, the ethical quandaries that lie behind Harvard and its legacy of slavery. And more broadly, as Sarah mentioned, we were one of actually dozens of universities and colleges and higher education institutions that are grappling with our entanglements with enslavement and slavery. And actually, I tend to connect this also with colonialism, both settler colonialism and other colonialist practices, because they certainly interweave with one another. And in thinking about, again, how we're entangled through direct relationship, the owner, enslaved people living in the house of the Harvard president, through our financial entanglements, the fact that we are able to do so much of what we do, that we have an endowment as large as we have because of the financial donations of people who made their money in connection, and because of our intellectual production that has been both wonderful and terrible. And that the fruits of our intellectual production continue to be born today, again, both for good and very much for ill. And so because this can be hard to talk about, and hard especially to discuss in a way that is complex, and helps one think about, well, I wasn't alive then, right? I'm just, I'm here on scholarship, or I was just hired to, help out in the instructional technology, right? What does this have to do with me? We've created these tools for conversation to help people think about, what does this have to do with us? And why and how? And then what do we expect of ourselves? What do we expect of others? What do we expect of our institution? What do we expect of our leaders, et cetera, sort of moving forward? So the first case study that we have, actually, that's been up on the website for a while, is A Forced Reckoning, which is actually about our intellectual legacy. And the ways in which the work of Louis Agassiz in the 19th century with his scientific theories really did, as Sarah said, help to form some of the basis for both eugenist and Jim Crow thinking moving forward. And it's a case where a group of students is trying to wrestle with how much should they sort of encounter this in an elective course at the School of Public Health. Should this have been an accident to encounter? Should they be required to encounter it? Why should they pay tuition to an institution so that then they learn about, the institution's lousy history? What are their responsibilities to know to take action moving forward? What does it mean for different kinds of students of different backgrounds, students with different aspirations to take this on? And what does it mean for the institution to take it on? Who else should be learning about it? It can't just be students who should be learning about it. who else needs to learn, and what should the outcomes be? So we have a case study and then a bunch of resources. You can see we have actually a reader's theater of it to sort of engage in a collective performative experience, a facilitator's guide, and so forth. And then there are 3 more cases that will be posted online, I'm hoping, in the next few weeks. Again, we are waiting for it to get through accessibility and design to get up. One about naming, and as you may know, there's been a report also about naming practices and principles at Harvard, and thinking about how you think about naming. Another one about the Rhodes Scholarship. Actually, we worked with the warden of Rhodes House, which Elizabeth Quiche, which was very helpful, and with others at Rhodes House, and thinking about how you think about, again, both things that are named after, but also bring privileges with people who are highly entangled with histories, in his case, of colonialism. And then also a case that was written by a Harvard student and staffer. These were actually all written by Harvard students, thinking about multiple universities' responsibility around land use and impact on housing and so forth. And there are forthcoming cases as well. Very briefly, I didn't warn you about this, Jerome. I'm sorry, but I knew you were going to be here, so I figured you'd be okay. We've been creating train the trainer video resources so that people can learn more how to use the resources I've been talking about. That video will be up soon. These are clips from the video, and there will be, again, more guides if you are interested in learning how to use these. And then finally, we've also been working on creating a book club, reader's guide, for people who want to read the report in the same way that the whole divinity school did as its common read. Again, if a house, if an alumni organization, if a department or school wants to read it together and have some guide, we're creating a reader's guide that you can use in a book club fashion in order to help guide you not only through the report, but through some of the questions that you might explore together.
Yeah, thank you. That was fantastic. So yes, Jerome, the floor is yours. And Jerome is going to talk a bit about the very recent partnership that was announced in March between the Harvard Library and the HBCU Digital Library Initiative. It's really exciting, and just appreciate you, Jerome, taking the time to come share with us about it.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Sarah, for having me here, and to the Vice Provost's office for putting this together. I'm going to talk very briefly about our project at Harvard Library, expanding access to African-American history. Sarah's mentioned earlier about how we enter this relationship and how we enter this work. And here on the slide, we have a great kind of statement around how we are partnering with the HBCU Library Alliance. One of the things that I want to say that is very important to add to how we in the library have approached this work with the HBCU Library Alliance is from a place of trust, transparency, and recognizing that there has been harm done in the past between institutions, institutional level, the people at those institutions, the population of those institutions, but really ensuring that Harvard enters the space from a place of humility and practice to build a great partnership with the HBCU Library Alliance. So again, we want to talk about, I'll talk about the shared goal of advancing open public access to archives and special collections pertaining to African-American history, and how working with the Alliance is not only just assisting the Alliance in some of the work that it's doing, but also how it ties into how the Alliance and HBCUs will impact Harvard and our collection here at the library. So throughout, you'll see photos. This is one of the photos that we shared as a part of the history from the HBCU Library Alliance. This is a picture of HBCU Queens from 1928 at Clark University, which is now part of the AUC, the Atlanta University Center Woodruff Library. This here is a picture of 1890 from the graduating class at Atlanta University. For those who don't know the history, Clark University and Atlanta University in the early 1900s merged to be one private institution. So when you hear say Clark Atlanta, the reason why its name is Clark Atlanta is because they merged from two HBCUs that were very small in the Atlanta region to become one institution. So we are supporting the HBCU Library Alliance's ongoing work as a part of addressing how Harvard's complicity in slavery and the systemic and enduring educational inequities rooted in slavery and its legacies. And so part of our work in Harvard here is we believe in curiosity, and this is our curiosity collection. And so while Harvard has been doing some of this work and collecting these materials and making them available, the work partnering with the HBCU Library Alliance will help us to expand not only our work in this area, but also have the Alliance really assist us with adding to and connecting our collections to make them available for researchers, scholars, faculty, as Harvard Library has always been heavily invested in and in tune with the curricular direction of the institution. So this work, we believe, will play a great role in expanding the knowledge base, not just for Harvard, but being able to expose HBCU collections around the world. So I'm going to go really quick into the project overview. So thus far, we have $6 million from the Harvard Legacy Slavery Initiative over 4 years, starting this year. This first year, we're spending time really working on what we're calling the discovery phase and discovery and planning phase, where we are currently really building that trust, building that transparency, building a rapport with the HBCU Library Alliance. And from there, we'll move into an implementation and assessment. Just to be sure that, again, everyone knows each participating HBCU library retains ownership of its collection. Harvard is not trying to acquire those materials. We're not trying to pay for those materials. We're not trying to borrow those materials. We're really just interested in the materials being available and exposed to the world. And Harvard is playing a key role as a part of our reparative work to be able to do that. And then we're going to have a project advisory group who will be managed jointly by the AUC Woodruff Library and Harvard Library. So this is a very real collaboration for us and work that we're planning to do over 4 years and even longer to continue to build a relationship with the HBCU Library Alliance. So here is the website that's currently available from the Alliance. And so part of the focus of the work that we're going to be doing is how do we enhance this platform that they use? How do we enhance the collections? So if you go to this particular website, you can see most institutions have already submitted information into this digital repository. And so we're looking to expand that. And just for those who may be familiar with the HBCU Library Alliance, there are a number of HBCUs who are not members of the Alliance. So our project, though, is even though it's partnering with the HBCU Library Alliance, is including all HBCUs in the nation. And so we're making sure that we have a very inclusive call to support this work and to build out this digital infrastructure. And our next steps are, we're looking to hire a program director. Again, we're going to form an advisory group. We're starting to draft the vision, the principles, and initial objectives, and we'll solidify those once we have a program director and an advisory group. And then we hope to complete the project plan and budget for 2024 to 2026. And then the last couple slides I have are just additional photos from archival collection. This again is from the graduating class of 1900 from Atlanta University. And then my very last photo is another from 1904. And so these are just very rich collections that we believe the world needs to have access to for research purposes, for historical purposes, and for ongoing educational purposes. And thank you, and there's my information. And I'll turn it back over to Sara.
Thank you. That was wonderful. And now, last but certainly not least, we're going to hear from Richard Cellini, who is the nation's expert on how do you actually identify direct descendants of those who were enslaved. So Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's a great privilege to be here, and I am very grateful for the people who have signed on to listen to this presentation and pepper us with questions. Was introduced, my name is Richard Cellini, and I'm the director of the Harvard Slavery Remembrance Program. I come to this work from the independent Georgetown Memory Project, and as Sara mentioned, Georgetown in 1838 sold 314 enslaved people to rescue the university. Our independent research initiative has been able to positively identify first name, last name, vital statistics, 236 of those enslaved people, and to trace and verify more than 10,000 direct descendants. And we were able to do that without any financial or other support from Georgetown University. And I share that just to say that this work is doable. The family structures of the Harvard affiliated slaves may be currently unknown, but they are not unknowable. Our mission at the Harvard Slavery Remembrance Program is to help people recover their truth, one family at a time. I just want to begin by rooting everybody, which I think has been mentioned several times, in the reality. To use Meira's phrase, Harvard's history is both wonderful and terrible. And part of the terrible side of it is that Harvard enslaved real people with real families and real names. As Sara mentioned, there are approximately 70 or up to 100, depending on how you count them, specific Harvard-affiliated enslaved people mentioned in the Harvard and Legacy of Slavery report. We believe there are many, many more to be discovered from archival research. But here I give you just pictures of 3 actual tombstones located in Boston and Cambridge of 3 actual people who were Harvard-affiliated enslaved people who are sort of so much with us that their tombstones are above ground and visible and legible to the naked eye today. And so this is how much they're sort of currently with us. But we all, I think, use these as touchstones to remind us of the reality of these people and their families. The Harvard Slavery Remembrance Program pledges to identify Harvard's enslaved by name and also to trace their direct descendants, again, by name. We want literally to provide them with Yad Vashem, a place and a name. And here you'll, of course, recognize that I'm quoting from Isaiah chapter 56, verses 4 and 5. For thus saith the Lord to those who keep the covenant, unto them I will give in my house a place and a name, an everlasting name that will endure forever. People often ask, well, who are the descendants? We hear a lot of talk about the descendants. For the Harvard Slavery Remembrance Program, we are focused on what are known as direct descendants. And direct descendants are what are also known as lineal descendants. In other words, you take a specific identifiable Harvard-affiliated enslaved ancestor, and then you trace down to their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and so on. So in other words, there's a direct line up. That's what makes them lineal between the enslaved ancestor and the living descendant. As I said, in the Georgetown case, we were able to find more than 10,000 such direct descendants. And again, in other words, people with a straight line up to one of the 314 enslaved people sold by Georgetown University. Just want to briefly talk about, why does it matter, sort of ontologically or just practically speaking, why does it matter that you're a direct descendant of somebody? What's special about being a direct descendant? Well, these 2 charts will help us understand this. Each of us has dozens of direct ancestors, but not a single one to spare. If you go back 5 or 6 generations, each and every one of us has exactly 126 direct ancestors. And on the chart on the left, you see how they sort of funnel down to create the most important part from most of our perspectives, which is us. You are here, this yellow thing in the center, and then it sort of branches back to get you 5 or 6 generations back to those 126 direct ancestors that make you possible or make me possible. The chart on the right shows what happens if you just erase even a single one of those descendants. That loss, that erasure, that destruction cascades down with ever increasing volume all the way to the present day, to the point that it literally means that you, or in my case, me, would not exist. So this is kind of a graphic way of showing why your direct ancestors matter and how they were treated matters, and by whom they were treated badly or well matters, because literally, if anything had happened to even a single one of your 126 ancestors, you would not exist today. So I think we can all agree, white, black, anybody can agree that it does indeed matter who our ancestors were, and it does indeed matter that we are their direct descendants. The Harvard Slavery Remembrance Program pursues 3 work streams simultaneously. This is presented in serial, but it's actually all of this is actually happening all at once. First of all, we are discovering additional enslaved ancestors, people on top of the 70 to 100 people identified in the Harvard Legacy of Slavery report. This, of course, involves a near small army of scholars and researchers to actually look into the archival record. When we find the sort of bare existence or identity of an enslaved ancestor, our next, who's affiliated with Harvard, our next task is to profile that enslaved ancestor. We don't have to create a full biography, but we have to create sort of enough particularity or specificity around an enslaved ancestor to make them a suitable subject for genealogical research, which is work stream 3. That is actually finding their direct descendants. So this is all happening all at once, all at the same time. We're not doing this in serial, but we're constantly working to discover enslaved ancestors, profile them to make them suitable for genealogical research, and then actually looking for their direct descendants. Just a little bit about how we do this. First and foremost, I want you to know that we, in establishing the genealogical connection and everything else for that matter, we are relying on traditional archival evidence. People often ask me, well, what about DNA or stuff on the internet or family oral histories or coincidences or commonalities of last names and geographic locations in communities like Cambridge or Boston? Those things are helpful, but they are helpful mostly, in fact, entirely, in pointing us back into the archival stack to look for archival evidence at every link in the chain of descent. When we do this work, we are applying Mayflower quality proof standards. In other words, the methodologies and standards used to establish the lineage of a Harvard-affiliated enslaved people is exactly the methodology that is used to establish the lineage of a Mayflower passenger. The ultimate sort of objects of that research and the families to which it apply may be radically different, but the standards themselves, the provenance is identical. When we do this work, the genealogical provenance, the academic certainty and quality of our conclusions about the lineage of Harvard-affiliated enslaved people will be every bit as fine as that sort of traditionally generated for Mayflower descendants and many other people. And sort of finally on methodology, I want to assure you that we will be collaborating and are collaborating with experts and institutions that are far beyond Harvard's gates. I frequently and often say that the history of Harvard slavery is not the history of Harvard. It's the history of slavery. And that means it's not contained primarily, certainly not exclusively, and not even primarily within the four walls of Harvard. The documentary record of Harvard's involvement in slavery and human trafficking is spread throughout archives, churches, historical societies, learned societies, municipalities, and more. Throughout Cambridge, Boston, the state of Massachusetts, New England, the United States, and really other parts of the world as well. And we are very, very much aware of that and are not limiting ourselves to sort of the four walls of Harvard. We hope that our work will change the way people see Harvard. This is a fairly traditional perspective on Harvard Yard, but you know, keeping in mind the work of the Harvard Slavery Remembrance Program, you know, here's another possible perspective, rather than the perspective focused on the university's founder or namesake. This is a photograph taken of the same yard from a different angle. This angle, however, features the college pump. The college pump itself is a replica, but we know the site is original, and we know for certain that this is the one place on campus that Harvard-affiliated enslaved people visited every day, multiple times a day. For some, Harvard will sort of continue to look like the first image I showed you, but for many others, including direct descendants, this will be the focal point, because this is the place where they will be able to go to commune directly with their ancestors. So I think that alone sort of gives you some idea how this work can change the way we see Harvard. but it will also change the way people see themselves and their families. I'm just going to briefly share a short series of photographs of Georgetown descendants. And I can assure you that these people are my friends and people I've worked with and my collaborators. And I can assure you that the knowledge of their genealogical connection to people who were involuntary founders of Georgetown University has indeed changed the way they see themselves and their families. Finally, in the largest sense, we hope and expect that this work will change the way we see each other. White and black, town and gown, educated and uneducated, urban and rural, on and on and on. If I've learned anything from this work, I've learned that there is no us and them, there is only us. And in fact, there has only ever been us. From the very beginning of the founding of this country, it's basically been the same bunch of people on the ground making history happen day to day. It's only ever been us. Black history is American history, and American history is Black history. Same is true of Indigenous history. I always say, if you love American history, then Black history and Indigenous history is actually just more of what you love. And hopefully, this research will, in a very tangible, direct way, help people change the way they see each other and help us understand that there really is just us. The work itself, I just have two more slides. The work itself, let me just say, is painstaking and meticulous. Privately, we frequently liken it to building a cathedral, that the work, can take a very long time. But I do want to assure you that progress is being made. Dozens of Harvard enslaved ancestors have already been profiled, and a number of them are in active genealogical research. In other words, the search for their direct descendants is actively underway. I'm tremendously encouraged by that because it proves out my earlier point that just as at Georgetown, at Harvard, these individuals and their families may be presently unknown, but they are not unknowable. And finally, I want to share with you a hope. This work that we're doing together, and the work that Harvard is doing, not by itself, but with Black people, Black families, and Black communities around the Commonwealth and around the world. We hope that this light we create together will endure forever. There will be other memorials and other commemorations of the enslaved people, but in some very real sense, one of the most important memorials that is created to the direct descendants and their enslaved ancestors will live in the hearts and minds of the families. And if the Georgetown history shows anything, and the history of our own family show, that knowledge truly can endure forever and outlast any stone or bronze monument that man can devise. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Richard. So we want to get to your questions. Keep putting them in the Q&A. As you are doing so, I want to ask one question of the panelists, and then I'll turn to your questions. And Richard, I want to stick with you.
Okay.
And the question is just, as you think about this whole initiative, why do you think it's so significant? And then I'll ask the same question, Jerome, with you, and then Meira.
I think, because of the reality of it at all, I think, those of us who have attended universities like Harvard or Georgetown or, similar universities, or any university for that matter, we all understand that we're warming ourselves by a fire we didn't build and drinking from a well we didn't dig. But this only raises the question of who did build that fire and who did dig that well? To whom do we owe thanks and gratitude? And the Harvard Slavery Remembrance Program is dedicated to answering that question with specificity, to give a real answer to that question. And I think that's highly meaningful, because those people have historically been erased from the memory of Harvard. Harvard's history may be wonderful and terrible, But we are not done with that history. We have a chance to make it wonderful again, and that will, in part, include recognizing the contributions of the people who built our university and made it the great institution that it is today.
Thank you, Richard. Jerome, let me turn to you and just hear what you think is most significant about this initiative.
Yeah, I was thinking about this question. So it's going to be a slightly intellectual and political answer, if I might. Looking at the political landscape that's happening around the country now around DEI work and understanding our history and owning our history as a nation and the good, the bad, and the ugly or the indifferent. This work, I think, for the library specifically and HBCU work is important because it allows us to connect history. I mean, there are several Harvard graduates who have gone and taught at HBCUs, been deans of the law school at HBCUs, who fought to get into Harvard, who then took what they learned back to their communities to help build up the next generation. And so we know that Eva B. Dykes, who was one of the first graduates of Radcliffe, went on to work with Oakwood University and has the library named after her, and they have her degrees. And Booker T. Washington wrote letters to Harvard to help start the library at Tuskegee. So there's positive connectivity in this, where we looked at inequities in education. And so this work helps us to continue to elevate the good things as well as the not so good things in our history.
Thank you. How about you, Meira?
I totally agree with both of Richard and Jerome's comments. And I think, in a way, I guess sort of the curricular work that we're doing is designed to help each one of us try to answer that question that you've asked, right? Because I think it is going to vary over person, over time, over place, over relationship with the institution, right? And it's going to change also as our knowledge grows. So in some way, I mean, every university is very complicated, Harvard not accepted, right? We are an institution devoted, according to our shield, to veritas, to truth. Truth is complex. It is something that can elude us and something that we have to choose to go after. And even when we know the same facts, how we interpret those and how we interpret our responsibilities and what the implications are for our future actions, it's going to change over time. And so, I mean, I think that's the reason that I'm actually, when President Bacco told the committee that the corporation was setting $100 million aside in the endowment permanently to fund this work permanently. Frankly, like a number of us really teared up, because that is a recognition that this is an ongoing, long-term obligation to remember, to wrestle, to uncover, to engage. And so so whatever answer I give right now, right, I will need to be different every few years.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We have a responsibility as we set up strategic priorities overall and then within specific projects to revisit them on a very frequent basis and ask ourselves, are we still on the right path? Do we need to adjust? I mean, the hard part about this work is we don't really have a roadmap. I mean, in the case of Richard's work, there's some guidance from Georgetown, but Harvard's a different institution. It's a different set of questions. And similar for the work that Jerome is doing and the work that Meira is doing. And so we are learning as we go, taking input. And I just want to underscore that we are really trying to listen hard and do this right. And we recognize that we're probably going to make mistakes in the process. If we don't, we are not trying hard enough and we're not taking enough risks. But we just ask of all of you, to give us a little bit of grace in this process, recognizing that our hearts are in the right place and we are really trying to make the most of this opportunity, as Meira really nicely described it. So I have other questions, but I want to get to yours because we only have a few minutes left. So maybe I will turn to you, Richard, to answer the question about what reparations were enacted by Georgetown.
I'll try to be very brief. Georgetown is a very different university with a very different history and very different dynamics. So I'm not sure entirely how directly applicable they are. Georgetown has expanded the definition of legacy admissions traditionally offered to the sons and daughters of alumni, staff, faculty, and benefactors to include the sons and daughters and grandsons and daughters of descendants. That has been the primary direct reparation. Georgetown has also created a fund to financially support projects that are put forward for community betterment by direct descendants. So Georgetown has both financially and in other ways reached out to the direct descendant community.
Thanks, Richard. So there are a few questions here which have similar themes. So one is from Mr. Tatum asking, once the $100 million is spent, what do we do since there'll still be deficits in areas like wealth disparities, health disparities, and the list goes on? So just want to underscore a point that Meira made, which is the money that's been allocated by the university has been done so in an endowment. So the intent is that it will go on in perpetuity. So long after all of us are gone, there will be funding to support this work. Now, that said, there might be opportunities to create more resources, but right now we have a significant sum of money to try to make a difference. But I think you raise a really good point, which is, number one, like the corrosive impacts of slavery impact every aspect today of American life. Harvard alone cannot solve that problem. And you're spot on that it affects the wealth disparities and the health disparities and transportation and education, and the list goes on and on and on. What we are trying to do with this effort is match the resources that we have to the areas where we excel and partner in ways that allows us to reach our mission. There are a lot of things that we won't be able to do because they are either outside of our resource constraints, they are not things that we're particularly good at, or they're not partners with whom we can drive the work forward. But there's a huge amount that we can accomplish given our education resources, given our research resources, and given the ability that we have to really partner with others and drive things forward. Related, there's a question about, what will this initiative look like in 10 or 20 years with the ever-changing climate of our history and our political climate? If we were to give you an answer to that question, you should call us on it and say, you can't possibly know the answer to that question. I will be really honest and say, we don't know exactly what it will look like in 5 years. We have an idea. We know where we're trying to go, but we have to be iterative and we have to be flexible in how we are approaching this work, because part of what is happening right now is that we are doing a huge amount of listening. And by doing that listening, we're going to hear where we need to go a little left or go a little right or completely switch course. And by getting that input, it's going to make us be better at the work that we're doing. And so what I can commit to you is that we will still be serious about the work. We will still be leaning into the recommendations and maybe beyond in 10 to 20 years. But the specifics of it are something that we just don't know the answer to right now. Let me pause and see if anyone has anything to add to that.
I think the only thing I would add is that, and this relates to one of the questions that I know was answered in the Q&A about how alumni can help, is that the we also will be a bigger we, right? So Sara showed the picture of the leadership team, and we've been talking in different ways about how we are already trying to build partnerships, how we have partnerships underway, how this is not just happening within the walls of the university, but that it's going to be also a distributed ownership and distributed leadership. And that the other reason that we can't answer the question is because we shouldn't be the only ones answering the question. Right? And I think that's really important. In one of the recent meetings that we had of the stakeholders across the university that Roshana and Sara is leading, thinking about this implementation work. One of the members of the group pointed out, as we were talking about HBCUs, that there are things that HBCUs rightly pride themselves on doing and knowing way better than Harvard does, and that this is therefore a true partnership of equals.
Yes.
With different kinds of resources, knowledge, personnel, et cetera, but that these have to be partnerships. And that's true for everything we're doing, including, say, on the curricular side, the learning that I am doing from students, with educators and so forth also, that none of us is the sole source of knowledge or wisdom, and we are not here to bestow it upon others. We're here to work and learn together.
That is a perfect, oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and Mary, the only thing I would add to your statement around the distribution of the work is that we also should anticipate that we have distributed accountability around how we do this work, that it's not just this insular group that's done it, but we're being held accountable to the community at large.
And that is a perfect note to end on. So Cassie, I will turn things over to you.
Thank you all, and thanks to all of you who have joined us today, both in Zoom and the many members of the alumni community who joined on YouTube. We hope you'll all join for more signature events soon. Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining.